Hello, I'm Rick Joyner. Welcome to the special bulletin on national health care. And we've been talking about things. Every bulletin I go into a little bit more depth, a little bit more detail. And excuse me that we're trying to do these in 10-minute sections, but that's because they're so much easier to distribute that way on, all kinds of these websites and programs. If we can keep them under 10 minutes, they're short briefs, and it's maybe all you want to watch for a day too. It's pretty intense stuff, and I'm sounding alarm. I'm going to be graphic. I'm going to be direct and bold, and I think it is time that we've got to wake up. I'm trying to wake up the church. I'm trying to mobilize the church. I'm trying to wake up America. We need to wake up America. 65% of Americans claim to be born again. 65%. Get this statistic. This is done by a Barna study. 3% of Americans have a Christian worldview. 65% born again, 3% a Christian worldview. What is a Christian worldview? It's seeing from the perspective, from God's perspective, from Christ's perspective, seeing the world through His eyes, which we do by searching the Scriptures. If Jesus, who was the Word, would take His stand on the great darkness that tried to subdue Him, would take His stand, if Jesus, who was the Word, would take His stand on it is written, how much more do we need to take our stand on what is written? Now, check this out in Isaiah chapter 5. One of the ultimate stages of depravity we could ever fall into, a nation could ever fall into, is to start calling good evil and evil good. At that point, we're at the end. That's that point now. God, even though He had a covenant with Israel, He judged all the nations. When they would hit a certain point, He would take care, not because He hated people, because He wanted to destroy people. No, because He knew He had to destroy the disease that had taken them over, that it would not spread any further. There are some things growing in America right now. There is a culture of death growing in America. It's why so many of our brothers and sisters have stood so long, so hard, prayed their hearts out, stood in rallies and gatherings and things like the call in other places to stand against abortion in this country. Because they knew what we could do to our infants. Pretty soon we'll be doing to others as well. That's how it started in Germany. In the last video bulletin, check it. I talked about the progression. It was a progression. Started with abortion. It grew until we'll kill anybody we want to kill. And by the millions. And it happened. And almost with no conscience, because their conscience had been increasingly seared. It's happened in our country. We actually made legal partial birth abortion. One of the first acts of this president. That is when you take the baby halfway out of the mother, a baby that is feeling, full of senses. They start developing those senses, those feelings, those emotions, very young in the womb. We're taking the third trimester, are able to do this, partial birth, halfway out of the mother, drill a hole in its head. This is how partial birth abortion is done. And then you suck its brains out. How could any mother allow such a thing? To that which is grown in her womb like that. How could we get to that point? How could any doctor do such a thing? How could any president make one of the first acts of his presidency to pass an executive resolution to allow such a thing to happen? There's a desensitization. Here's a president with the most beautiful children you can imagine. Most wonderful, beautiful family, which I appreciate. I believe they've brought such dignity to the White House and such, it is such a wonderful, inspiring family. You have to love those kids. But think of life. The first challenge to Solomon's wisdom, and I believe it is the first challenge to the wisdom of anybody who's going to be an authority, is to find those who care for life. He was able to decide the real mother from the pretender by the one who was able. She would even give up her child as long as he could live. Do not divide my child. I don't have, let her have it, just let him live. To find the one who loved life. That was the first test of his wisdom, and I believe it is the first test of wisdom for any government, that we esteem and honor life. I tell you where it's headed, where things are headed. If we pass national health care in its present form, I believe in any form, in our government, this government, that would allow such a thing to be done to infants, you don't think it's going to be much easier to do that to the elderly? Who they're going to say and justify, well, they've already lived their lives. We will absolutely end up with healthcare rationing if we go to a national healthcare system. It's happened everywhere else. It will happen here. We don't have enough doctors right now. You can pay almost whatever, and you're still going to be in a wait line for doctors. And all of a sudden, we're going to add a third more people, millions and millions of people to the system. Everything's going to bog down right now, but one reason we don't have enough doctors, nobody wants to be a doctor anymore in the present system, is wearing them out. All the paperwork and all the grief that they go through in the present, the malpractice insurance they have to carry makes it almost so that they cannot practice anymore and pay those high premiums because of tort lawsuits and everything else. And I've already talked to a lot of doctors. They said under a system like this, they absolutely could not practice. They could not endure such a thing. We're going to lose many of the doctors, nurses, and everybody else we already have. We will go to rationing, and I believe very fast. And you know who's going to be the first to be rationed? I believe it's going to be the elderly, and they'll justify that. Well, they've already lived their life. There are provisions in this bill. Counsel them through their death. Let's just get rid of them. Now, think of this. I don't know. I don't like to presume the most evil intent on people. I believe most people have good intentions, or what they at least consider good intentions. And if it were between me, I've already lived 60 years, and one of my children, if there was only enough food for one of us, I'd say, look, I've lived my life. I would make the choice. Please, you take this, and I'll go away, I'll die. I would make that. I think most of the elders would, but you want them to make the choice. You don't want the government to determine who's going to live or die. You don't want bureaucrats doing that. And they will do it for your children too. They will your children that get the health care. We don't want bureaucrats doing that. That should be the scariest thing in the world. We've got to back up. We've got to take that. We have to absolutely insist to our congressmen and senators, they do not pass this bill, not in its present form. And we've got to speak loudly and clearly. There's check out our website. There's information on our website so you can contact every senator, every congressman, your representative. I would call them once a day. Just take 5 minutes. That's all it takes. You could save your children's lives. You could save your parents' lives. Because we're headed towards an absolute catastrophe in this country if this thing goes through. We cannot let that happen. Now, there's already that culture of death. Now, here's a point. We are come to I'm a baby boomer, and there are a lot of baby boomers about to retire. The Social Security system is already broke. It is already bankrupt. It's just the government doesn't have to declare it. They're not telling us the truth. They're not even telling us the truth about our deficits. Our deficits are in the tens of trillions of dollars. If you add the liability of Social Security and the other entitlement programs, one estimate has been $100 trillion, our present debt on this nation. Now, nobody's going there, but that's the truth. They're doing the accounting on a cash basis, which they would throw us in jail for doing. They're not telling us the whole truth, but there are people out there thinking we cannot take care of all these people. And I know some are thinking this health care bill is intended to wipe out that generation that they know they cannot take care of. There's no way to pay that Social Security. There's no way to pay to take care of them in Medicare, Medicaid. I'm not, I don't believe, I'm not that sinister. I'm not that cynical right now. But I'm saying that will be the impact, whether anybody thinks it through or is intentionally doing it or not. That will be the impact of our elders, our fathers and mothers are in jeopardy. If you're a baby boomer, you're in serious jeopardy with this health care bill. You don't want to miss these next special bulletins when we talk about this in more detail.